Well, Mitt, thank you for taking time. You've served the state, you've served the country, you've done a lot of wonderful things, and we appreciate you.
Thanks, Aaron. Very kind.
We're at a really interesting period of time, even a crossroads. It's an election year. Geopolitically speaking, there's a lot happening around the world. I wanted to take just a few minutes today and talk about the future of American leadership, what that means, what we need to do here domestically to get our house in order, but also what does the future look like geopolitically? How do we work with the China and the Iran and the Russia? And so we're going to cover some fun topics today, and appreciate your willingness. Let me just kind of throw a softball out there. Let's talk about the national debt. Do you see the debt getting any better? Do you see us getting out from a policy perspective and being able to curb some of this spending? What is your take on that?
I don't think you're going to see a reduction in the debt burden and the interest that we're paying over some period of time until there's some kind of crisis, which will inevitably occur over the next 5 or 10 years, or unless you have a particularly strong president that's willing to acknowledge that we've got a problem and deal with it. I don't think people can politically comprehend what does it mean to have $36 trillion in national debt, but perhaps they can understand that when you're spending about $1 trillion in interest, that has dramatic implications. So for instance, if we didn't have $1 trillion in interest to spend, we could probably quadruple our military procurement budget. We could buy 4 times as many aircraft, ships. We could renew our nuclear deterrent and so forth. We could do that with about 4 times the level that we are right now. Or we could decide we could double Social Security payments for all our seniors. All right, this is the cost of the interest that we have, and the interest cost keeps going up and will keep going up, particularly as we keep on adding more debt to the balance sheet. So it is a national security as well as domestic well-being reality that this debt and the interest associated with it is keeping us from doing those things that are necessary for us to be the leader of the free world.
We always tend to frame national security in terms of China. What's China doing? What's Russia doing? To an extent, what is Iran doing? And obviously our neighbors impact what we do at home. It feels like our house is not in order here in the United States. We're not talking, the left and the right aren't talking. I feel like there's some big conversations that need to be had. Do you feel like this election is going to allow us to get to a place where we can sit down, come together and talk about policy solutions? Where do you see the national dialogue going from here?
No, I don't think the national dialogue is terribly productive right now. I think our politics are more performative than they are being driven towards solutions. I think when someone becomes a president, when a party is in power, they try and do some of the things that they think are right, but a lot of what they're doing is trying to get a chance to win the next election. I mean, it's every 2 years people are thinking about, okay, who's in charge next? Obviously, that's for Congress and for the Senate and the White House. It's a little longer time frame, but if a president does care about every 2 years and who's going to be in the House, and the Senate cares in the same way. So we just have found ourselves over the last decade or so having a very hard time dealing with the challenges that we have. The immigration system we have is one of those. I mean, it's been 25, 30 years since we've been able to put in place any kind of meaningful, appropriate immigration policy. We know we need legal immigration in the country. We have a lot of employers, particularly in agriculture, that need people to come here and work either temporarily or to come permanently and get green cards. But it's a mess. And we allow people to come into the country illegally. They're then in the shadows and not able to contribute to our society in the same way as if we had a legal system that worked. There was an effort by Republicans and Democrats this year to resolve this impasse and reach a bipartisan solution. But in this case, former President Trump stepped in and said, oh, don't do it. I want this to continue to be a mess so that it's a good campaign issue. So winning elections has become more important than doing what's right for the country in many respects, and that does not bode well for our ability to lead the world. And you mentioned the threat of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Recognize that there is today a global contest between the authoritarians, which are increasingly linked, and the free nations, which are also increasingly linked. The authoritarians have been doing pretty well and have been gaining strength, and we're not keeping up, in my opinion. And I don't see us taking action that will return us to a position of strength. I mean, it was, I think, Ronald Reagan who talked about peace through strength. We're not doing that. We're falling behind in terms of our military strength, and that is something which gives me great concern.
How are we falling behind? I hear that. I hear that China, for example, has advanced materials that can withstand, re-entry, materials that don't burn up when they hit the atmosphere, hypersonics, things like that. It's no secret they're obviously doing a lot with the Belt and Road Initiative, with Southeast Asia. What are we not doing well enough to compete with our foes around the world?
Well, to begin with, China funds their military might with their economic prowess. And they don't play by the same rules that the rest of the world plays by. And by the way, congratulations to them, because we let them play by whatever rules they want. So in our country, a monopoly is going to be broken up. Same thing in the EU. They're going to break up monopolies. We don't break up monopolies in China. We let them establish monopolies and then compete with us. We let them carry out something called predatory pricing, where you price your products well below their cost. You drive out the competition, then you raise your prices. That's something which is illegal here and in Europe and around the world among free nations. But China does that all the time, and we haven't taken action to prevent that. So China is able to generate huge amounts of cash flow by virtue of their competitive practices. We allow that. They then use those resources to invest in their military, and they are out procuring us by a wide margin. I don't know exactly what the number is, but of our roughly $1 trillion that we spend on our military, only about 15% is on procurement of weaponry. And that's because most of our spending is on salaries and health care and housing and veterans benefits and all these features. They don't have those kinds of things. Their cost, according to one study, their cost of building a ship is 1/20th what our cost is. So they're able to buy a lot more armament than we are, and as a result, we are falling further behind. They've also, both Russia and China, are modernizing their nuclear deterrent. We haven't. We've begun to do that. But if you were to say there's peace through strength, we're not exhibiting a willingness to stay strong and to show the kind of strength that we'd like to have the rest of the world say, oh, watch out, America's real strong. And I know there are people who say, we can't be the policeman of the world. And I understand, we can't go around every place that there's conflict and bad behavior and say, we're going to step in and stop that. That's not our role. But we should have the capacity, if we wanted to police something, to be able to do it. And I think that's increasingly not the case. And by the way, if we're not the, if you will, policeman of the world, if we don't have the capacity to be the policeman of the world, I know one country that'd be happy to take that role, and that's China, because they're investing dramatically in their military might and building the kind of armament that doesn't just allow them to protect their homeland, but to project power throughout the world. And they've got a ways to go in that regard, but that's where they're headed. You mentioned Belt and Road. Belt and Road is designed not only to provide bases, they have some 19 bases outside of China where they're the majority owner. Ports, I say bases, I meant ports. This gives them an advantage which they otherwise wouldn't have had, allows them to project power. It also allows them to get critical raw materials into those ports and then take it into China for their manufacturing base, which fuels their industries, as well as provides them with the key ingredients for a war machine. So we're watching all this happen and doing nothing about it.
Why aren't we doing anything about it?
Well, because it's much more attractive just to say, hey, we're great. We spend more than anybody else. I mean, I listen to some of my friends on the left, and they say, we spend more than anyone in the world on our military. It's like, yeah, but we're spending for veterans benefits and soldiers and health care. Those are all fine and well. But in terms of procuring weapons and the technology for the wars of the future, we're not keeping up. I mean, I understand, listen to the CEO of Palantir, one of the enterprises that provides technology to our Department of Defense. And they said, look, we're spending less than 1% of our military budget on software. Now, I happen to think that software is how the wars of the future are going to be considered, hopefully not fought, but at least considered. And I mean, we should be spending multiples of that, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
On software.
Especially with AI now.
I mean, that's maybe I'm wrong, but they say that you typically arm for the last war, and you buy the equipment that was needed for the last war. I understand that, but we're going to have to look at the cyber capabilities, the space capabilities, the AI capabilities that might be involved in a future, hopefully not a future conflict, but in the future deterrent from conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. We were in Taiwan earlier this year, just got back from Japan. Before that, we met with President Zelensky. We've been to Ukraine a couple of times. We continue to hear that AI, software, drones, which by the way are all powered by AI and software now, are all critical for each of those markets. Utah has sold a little over $100 million worth of defense technology into Ukraine since the war broke out. I grow a little bit concerned because we have great companies. 20% of Utah's economy is aerospace and defense. Cybersecurity, space exploration, it's very broad, but it all flows up into that industry. There are 40% less entrepreneurs now than there were 10 years ago in this space because doing business with the federal government is so hard. You raise some capital, you burn through that capital, you hope you get a program of record, you hope that you can land a DARPA contract, but many don't. How do we solve the bureaucracy? How do we make it more efficient? This might be a little bit out of the legislative lane, but with your perspective, I'd love to hear, how do we help businesses do business with the federal government to strengthen the DoD?
Well, first of all, in my view, we should allow DoD to be able to make investments in projects that they deem having long-term military advantage. There's this valley of doom that we talk about where enterprises are able to get a new technology started with some promise, but then they find it very hard to get additional funding in the private sector to be able to create something which has real implications down the road. Allowing the military to help provide equity financing or to encourage the private sector to provide equity financing to businesses in that valley, it makes some sense. That's one thing we could do. But also just the government contracting comes from a setting where people are so terrified of doing something that's going to get them in trouble that we put in place all sorts of procedures to keep that from happening. In a normal enterprise, if you said, look, we're going to make sure that if you're General Motors, for instance, that everything we buy, no one could ever make a mistake. Everything we buy can never be criticized. Well, they're going to go out of business because it's going to paralyze their ability to keep up. And you have to recognize that there will be some errors, but speed and encouraging entrepreneurship and innovation is at least as important as avoiding error. And that's something which I think it has to come with the culture of the presidency and the Department of Defense. Is that going to change anytime in the immediate future? Probably not. But that's just part of the disadvantage that we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Mitt, thank you for taking time. You've blessed the state. You've been great. I hope you and your family are well, and we appreciate you sharing some words and your perspective with this group here at the summit.
Well, I appreciate the work that you're doing, not only for our state, but for the nation. We're in a competition with the authoritarians. We've got to recognize that. Piecemeal measures, trying to hit them here with a tariff and there with a sanction of some kind is not going to change the dynamic. We need to dramatically increase our investment in military technology and hardware. At the same time, we need to make changes in our own system such that we're able to address the challenges that we have. And I think that flows from one of two pathways. One is a crisis that wakes us up. I hope that's not it, because sometimes the crisis kills you. The other is a leader that stands up and gets us on the right path. That was Churchill in England, commencement of the Second World War. It was Ronald Reagan here as we were going into a period of malaise and he overcame the Soviet Union. We need that kind of leadership. I don't see it coming in the immediate future, but we can hope it will and encourage people to get behind folks who they think can make that happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.